Okay, civil society. If I can ask for everyone's attention. Guys, we're going to have a presentation.
Bon, notre travail consistait à voir l'action de la société civile afin d'améliorer le rôle de la société civile. Nous avons pensé qu'il faut, premièrement, compléter l'action du gouvernement. C'est-à-dire, lorsque le gouvernement prend une initiative, il n'envisage pas, bon, on s'assure qu'il a envisagé tout le monde, c'est-à-dire vérifier s'il n'y a pas d'exclus, tels que des personnes trop jeunes pour avoir accès, si le gouvernement a pensé aux personnes très jeunes ou aux personnes vieux, parce qu'il pourrait juste s'arranger à être dans une certaine marge. Regardez si le gouvernement permet aux personnes qui sont dans des zones éloignées d'avoir accès à même titre que des personnes qui sont dans les zones urbaines. Regardez les contraintes de la pauvreté, les moyens. Le coût, c'est toujours... tout le monde ne peut pas se permettre certains services. Là, donc, il faudrait voir si les pauvres peuvent profiter. Ceux qui n'ont pas des moyens, ceux qui ne vivent pas la moyenne peuvent aussi profiter. Regardez si on a tenu compte des handicapés. Est-ce que les handicapés, des personnes souffrant d'un certain manque audiovisuel ou bien toute autre chose, on leur a mis dans le panier, s'ils pourront bénéficier à juste titre que les autres. Regardez s'il y a des analphabètes. Si on a pensé à un programme pour permettre aux analphabètes de pouvoir profiter aussi à même titre que les autres. Ça, c'est pour la priorité numéro 1. Pour la priorité numéro 2, vérifier les droits des utilisateurs, tels que la liberté, la vie privée du consommateur. Est-ce que parce que le gouvernement a décidé de permettre à toute la population d'avoir accès à Internet, on doit contrôler les actions qu'ils mènent, ou bien leurs libertés ne sont pas bafouées. On doit vérifier aussi la confiance. Est-ce que celui qui accède à Internet a confiance à ce qu'il fait? Lorsqu'il s'en va sur Internet, lorsqu'il fait un service, est-ce qu'il est confiant? Est-ce que quand il demande un service, par exemple, un achat en ligne, est-ce qu'il est sûr d'être livré? Il faudrait vérifier et appeler dans les différents acteurs à mettre ce point sur la confiance et aussi la sécurité. Chacun doit se sentir en sécurité. On doit donc pouvoir montrer à tout le monde qu'on peut être en sécurité sur Internet en fonction des bonnes pratiques que l'on aura. Bon, là, il faudrait voir les contraintes. Quelles sont nos contraintes? Il y a le budget, qui est un problème très récurrent et je dirais pas petit, un problème pas petit. Il y a le pouvoir. Lorsque la société civile parle, on dit ce sont les gars là, ils bavardent pour eux et après. Et il y a la formation. Il faudrait qu'avant de venir conseiller les gens, que vous soyez au courant de quelle technologie, pouvoir connaître qu'est-ce qui existe avant de pouvoir dire que non, pour ce qui est bien, pour les utilisateurs finaux, c'est telle chose. Il faudrait déjà savoir ce qui existe. C'est pour ça que nous avons cette contrainte de formation. Et nous avons... qu'est-ce qu'il nous faut donc pour atteindre les objectifs? Il faudrait donc de l'aide, telles que les subventions. On doit pouvoir, les sociétés civiles doivent pouvoir fédérer leurs forces afin de parler sa porte plus haut lorsqu'ils sont ensemble. Parce que, comme on dit souvent chez nous, seul on ne peut pas attacher, on ne peut pas faire un gros fagot. Bon, bref, On n'attache pas de fagots sur un morceau de bois. Il faudrait donc pouvoir bénéficier des best practices, c'est-à-dire les subventions données par les organismes internationaux afin d'encourager pour ceux qui font de la bonne pratique. Best practices. Ceux qui défendent vraiment les droits des populations. Bon, je pense que sur ce, nous avons un peu essayé de parcourir l'ensemble des actions concrètes que pourrait mener la société civile afin de compléter l'action du gouvernement, voire et permettre aux utilisateurs finaux de bénéficier au juste titre que tous ceux, et sans mettre en marge certaines personnes. Bon, je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. I think some of the key things here, which I think that I hope that you guys saw as well when you went through this, is that you can, when you look here, for example, the priorities, ensuring no one's left behind, involving people with disabilities, remote areas, poor people, people that are illiterate, those groups, but also the kind of the major issues around privacy rules, trust. Those are kind of the key concerns of stakeholder groups. They will be wanting to focus on this one. So if you want to communicate with them and form an alliance, that's something that is really useful to have in mind, that this is what they want. So a message to them, if we take internet issues, for example, this is in line with what the technical community wants, right? We want to extend access to the rural areas. We want to have full inclusion of everyone to be able to use the internet. We see trust. Trust was mentioning. Trust is a key thing, which we're talking about this afternoon, for people to actually utilize the internet. So there's many priorities that there where this stakeholder group, the technical community, share a common concern. And what's also interesting, if you compare this, you were mentioning in relation to the government, that you can think of, sometimes you can see the government perhaps being concerned with a specific voter constituency. So to them, the political benefit of doing an action may not involve helping the poor people or people in rural areas, but this stakeholder group that is advocating for it is concerned about it. So you can see that in one way they might have priorities in the government. And then something really interesting here in the second one, I think budget is something that we're probably going to hear from everyone being constrained, but power not being taken seriously. I agree that's probably a very common concern for many in civil society. And if you bring that into what help do they need in terms of information, best practices, then you understand how you can contribute and support them in coordinating the goal. Right? You can provide them with those, either that authority that comes with, we're representing the technical community in many instances. You represent the technical knowledge, not necessarily advocating for rights issues, although we're concerned with them, but the authority comes from being technical experts in some cases. So you can bring that to them and support them in their constraint of not being taken seriously by forming a coalition, right? Leveraging each other's benefits. So I think it was an excellent presentation. So we're going to move to the front tables regulator to present.
Voilà, merci. Nous représentons le régulateur. Donc, notre exposé s'articulera autour de 3 points. Nos priorités, nos contraintes et également qu'est-ce qui peut nous aider à atteindre nos objectifs. Voilà, primo, parmi nos priorités, nous avons d'abord promouvoir la concurrence. en tant que régulateur, il faut avoir la concurrence pour faciliter l'accès aux services à toutes les entreprises. On doit également, en tant que régulateur, organiser, procéder sur le secteur même des TIC pour savoir quels sont les problèmes, l'analyse SWOT, quelles sont nos forces, nos faiblesses, nos opportunités et nos menaces. En tant que régulateur, nous devrons également libéraliser les accès aux fibres, par exemple. Et là, nous prenons par exemple ici au Cameroun, il n'y a qu'une seule société étatique qui est en charge de la gestion de la fibre optique. Alors que par exemple au Maroc, il y a plusieurs sociétés. Chaque société, chaque opérateur peut établir ses branchements depuis l'océan. Donc, c'est déjà une bonne chose. Et c'est pareil également de la société de télécommunications Sotel qui s'en charge de la gestion de la fibre optique. Et là-bas, on a deux fibres optiques, il y a un qui vient du Cameroun, l'autre du Soudan, à des milliers de kilomètres. En tant que régulateur, nous devons également faciliter l'accréditation, puisque c'est le régulateur qui donne l'accréditation aux différents opérateurs qui veulent s'installer. Donc, on doit faciliter le plus possible aux nouveaux entrants, par exemple, à des exonérations. Au Tchad, cette exonération est de 5 ans. Ici, on n'est pas de 2 ans. On doit également, en tant que régulateur, impliquer tous les acteurs, par exemple la société civile, les consommateurs, les investisseurs, dans les différentes études et dans aussi les prises de décision. Il n'est pas dit que ils prennent leur seul. Maintenant, en ce qui concerne nos contraintes, en tant que régulateur, vous n'êtes sans le savoir que ici en Afrique, la plus grande des contraintes, c'est la contrainte infrastructurelle. On a vraiment beaucoup de problèmes d'infrastructure. Et également, la contrainte, par exemple, de la non-indépendance du régulateur. Parce que le régulateur est sous la tutelle du ministère qui est géré d'ailleurs par des politiques. Et à chaque fois, il y a des intrusions. Il y a des décisions qui viennent d'en haut, et ils sont obligés de les appliquer, même si cela ne favorise pas le consommateur. Ils sont obligés. Mais il faudrait qu'il y ait une réelle indépendance face au régulateur, face à l'État. Et concernant notre troisième point, concerne par exemple ce qui peut nous aider pour atteindre nos objectifs, il faut que les lois soient favorables d'abord au développement du pays. Les lois votées par l'Assemblée nationale. Il faut également former des gens, former des hommes, des techniciens et les cadres de régulation, au métier de régulation, par exemple en économie numérique, au droit, management, leadership, et qu'ils puissent d'abord comprendre réellement la problématique avant d'y apporter des solutions. J'en ai fini. Merci.
Thank you very much. And again, a very good presentation. And I think you managed to capture the view of the regulator, what they're facing, and some of the concerns that they have. But I wanted to point out a few things which I think was really important in this presentation. And the first one is that the regulator is probably very concerned about competition. They realize that is a favorable act. Depending a little bit on the setting, some regulators might not be concerned about it because of, as you mentioned, lower down, because of you are being trained politically in turn. But I would agree that most regulators probably see it as self-beneficial. But more importantly here, the research component that you brought up, the fact that a regulator has to have this, you mentioned the SWOT analysis, also identify the threats that they have to proceed with cautions, because that is part of the mandate from the government, right? So they're constrained by that mandate that they can't only move forward without considering the consequences of it. So in that sense, when you're putting yourself in the shoes of a regulator, you can also realize that it's not necessarily moving as fast as you want, because in their mandate, they are obliged to have both the opportunities and the threats analysis in what they're doing. So just by putting yourself in the shoes that that's one of their issues, it's probably useful to understand how they reason. And as we have mentioned before, what you mentioned in terms of their constraints, that they're not really independent, and that can differ from country to country. Sometimes they are fully independent, sometimes they're semi-independent, and sometimes not at all. And yeah, if they're not independent at all, it's obviously it's going to be tricky. But then perhaps that is a priority in your advocacy to advocate for why they should be independent. Because once you unlock that big knot of them not being independent and being followed by some, if you have a regulator that believes in competition, but their political constraints say that competition is bad, it's the first step is to advocate for an independent regulator. You've unlocked a pretty big knot in them being allowed for other regulations to follow. And lastly, as you were mentioning, the things they might need help with is could be very well in training, because depending on the country and depending on the political priorities in certain countries, you might have more or less resources. They might not have the technical expertise that they need in order to actually fulfill all of their mandate in terms of, for example, doing an opportunity analysis, a threat analysis, etc., which in turn slows down their process in whatever they're. So if they don't have the competence in their organization in order to fairly assess the impact of a new regulation or the impact of let's say, issue as a net rally, then that could be stuck for years and years and years and years. So training and competence is certainly a train of them where you as a non-government state or a non-government, that is an opportunity to help them out, right? To provide expertise, to put in the door where you provide expertise and knowledge, which in turn can facilitate other actions. So with that, the table, and we're going to start with consumers.
Oui. Parler avec nous ce matin, peut-être expliquer ce que ça réfère. Je ne sais pas, c'est juste que j'étais sous pression, on a pu compris vers minuit et il fallait que je sorte très tôt à 7 heures pour que ça commence à 8 heures. Mais j'ai quand même fait des échanges avec Roman pour l'expliquer.
Hi everyone, my name is Aminjai. I'm representing the consumers, in other words, the end users. Well, the first question I'll ask myself as a consumer is, what are my priorities? As a consumer, what do I want? What do I need? What I want as a consumer is easy access to the internet with no restrictions, no hassle, and affordable access as well. I need the internet to be affordable. I need the internet to be courteous. In other words, being accessible everywhere. I need the internet to be neutral, no restrictions by the ISPs. I need the internet to be I need my privacy. So I don't want the ISPs to violate my privacy. Okay. Under my constraints will be lack of ability to use the internet. As a user, if I want, okay, the infrastructure to be in the place, I could have the internet, everything in place. But if I don't know how to use the net, I cannot use it. So that is one of my constraints, and the inability to afford the internet as well. If the internet is perhaps is not expensive, but if I don't have like the money to
Yes,
have it in,
approximately 2 to 3 years.
it's an issue. So another constraint could be poor or limited bandwidth. Yes, I could have the problem of uploading files on the net, or also violation of user rights by web developers is also a constraint, because I could use a website. I could be using a website with my data in it, and the web developer has access to my content, and the web developer can use those contents to sell out my contents to other sites as well. So that also is a constraint. And the other constraint is poor security of sites, leading to increased vulnerability of user data. For instance, I have I'm registered to a social media. All my contents are there. And then a hacker to get access to my content due to poor design of the developer. Yeah. So my other constraint as a user is poor access to electricity. Lack of power is also a constraint. So what would help me to achieve my goal? One of make internet access a human right. Make internet access close to free, just like water. Water is close to free. So if internet is close to free, it will be accessible everywhere. And another point is conduct training, sensitize people about the internet usage, um, tell people about the benefit of using the net, what the internet contains. And the other point is enforcement of net neutrality. As a user, I have the right to use and go to any site. I have the right to use the internet freely. Advocate our rights for internet access. And as a user as well, I need to be responsible. I need to be a responsible user. I need to, for instance, as a user, I need to be responsible in the sense that I shouldn't be uploading pornographic materials on the net. Yes, I should use the internet wisely. You can use the internet wisely if you want. Advocate for full rights to internet access. And also for under the constraints of a developer, how the site are poorly built, a developer could increase the security of the site and then restrict the site from being site from intruders. The other point is so that as a developer, you should respect other people's rights. You should not go into the content and then broadcast it online. It's really poor. Without wasting much time, these are the few points that we took into consideration. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I think what's interesting here is I think that all of us can very relate to this because we're all end users, right? But it's really useful to do this exercise because sometimes in our role as an organization, we might have kind of disconnecting from our role as end users. So constantly remind ourselves of what we as perhaps more advanced users uh, have as preferences, but also expanding that to a broader set of consumers is really useful because that pinpoints some of the issues that are really important in access and something that we will be discussing later today, both in the sense that it has to be easy access, for example, that there shouldn't be any restrictions to how you are able to access the internet. It should be as smooth as possible. It shouldn't be any larger constraints, both technically, politically, in terms of how you can access content. Affordability, of course, it's probably one of the biggest barriers for people to use it extensively, or even to get the first role in there. And then an interesting point here as well is the privacy part, which we came back to that from the civil society, and that relates, as we will be discussing later today, how that impacts access, because as you mentioned, you don't feel confident in having privacy online that will limit your use of the internet, which goes back to the idea of a trusted network to actually be useful for whoever is using it. And one thing here that I think will should be a bigger focus on all the discussions in terms of access is the case of limited bandwidth, because sometimes we set the goals too low that any access is good access. That is true, it's better than nothing, but at the same time, the way that the internet is progressing in terms of services, in terms of content, you won't be able to utilize the full benefits of the internet. You won't actually be able to be interoperable with the whole world unless you have a certain degree of bandwidth. If you want to have a Skype conversation with someone on the other side of the world, you better have a degree of bandwidth. So to set that as a priority, as something that is a real concern whenever you're advocating that internet access is good, but we also have to think about meaningful access, quality of access, etc., so that message doesn't get lost. If you don't prioritize that in your messaging, in the policies that come out, you might end up with a kind of subpar internet. So I think that's a really useful thing to bring in all of the work, that the ambitions should be set high. And of course, I think what you're mentioning here of enforcement of net neutrality, that is a concern of consumers, and that should be a message to the government, to regulator that is thinking about net neutrality, that if it is a concern for the user, it will likely impact the usage of the internet, and if it impacts the usage of the internet, it will impact the benefits of the internet. So if you want to actually have the internet being a tool for development, being a tool for economic progress, you should really be very careful about anything that might be restricting the user's will to use the internet. And that relates to the issues around trust, privacy, net neutrality, as you mentioned. So I hope that you guys find it useful to go through these stakeholders to think about. So the last one that we have is the regulator in the mixed group. Voilà.
Bonjour tout le monde. En tant que régulateur, les premiers points de sécurité que nous nous sommes donnés en mission, c'est de tenir un état de lieu qui va nous permettre de savoir les problèmes énergétiques, les zones d'accès, les zones où l'accès est facile et les zones d'accès difficile, ou les zones même où l'accès n'est même pas. Ensuite, les problèmes des ressources humaines. Donc, l'état de lieu va nous permettre de savoir tout ceci. En plus de ça, comme le gouvernement s'est fixé l'objectif 100%, nous, on doit se rassurer, est-ce que le gouvernement a le budget nécessaire pour ça? Ensuite, le troisième point, ce serait de réviser les compétences juridiques du régulateur pour bien clarifier ses rôles. Parce que, l'exemple au Cameroun ici, il y a 2 régulateurs. Où les rôles, à un certain moment donné, peuvent se piétiner. On ne sait pas réellement qui doit faire quoi. Donc, on commence par réviser les compétences juridiques du régulateur pour lui dans son rôle. Là, ça permet de faciliter beaucoup de choses plus loin. Maintenant, en termes de contraintes, nous avons des contraintes énergétiques, des contraintes infrastructurales, des contraintes liées à la formation, des contraintes liées également à la qualité du service fourni par les opérateurs. Mais au niveau des priorités, l'État doit nous permettre de décliner toutes ces contraintes point par point. Maintenant, s'agissant de ce que je dois faire pour atteindre mes objectifs, c'est d'impliquer les universitaires et les techniciens pour aider à la formation et au maintien des étudiants. On peut aussi, nous devons faire aussi l'ouverture du marché pour faciliter l'obtention des licences. On a vu hier, par exemple, des zones où l'utilisation du réseau n'est pas aussi que l'opérateur ne veut pas y aller parce qu'il ne gagne pas. Maintenant, si on facilite l'obtention des licences, supposons par exemple un opérateur privé, bon, moi je lui dis, ah bon, la capitale elle est saturée, mais est-ce que tu acceptes d'aller dans telle zone? Il dit oui, vous pouvez lui dire d'accord, comme tu as accepté d'aller dans cette zone où il n'y a pas assez de clients, au lieu de 2 ans d'exonération, je vais te donner 5 ans. Donc, le régulateur doit faire ses facilités pour attirer la concurrence. Ensuite, le régulateur doit mettre en place une stratégie multi-acteurs en impliquant les autorités locales, c'est-à-dire les GIE, les groupements féminins, les chefs traditionnels. Vraiment, quand on dit multi-acteurs, ça prend tout le monde en compte. Et on développe aussi le fonds de solidarité des télécoms dont on a parlé hier. Donc, à partir de ces différents points, nous devons pouvoir atteindre les objectifs que nous nous sommes fixés. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. I think this presentation put out some really interesting points. If you look at the first priority they listed, situational awareness analysis, that is essentially what we did yesterday, right? That's what all the stakeholder groups are doing. So just having that in mind, you're thinking about, you know, a big policy goal has been set by the government, and then realize that everyone is trying to figure out how to do this. So it's a pretty good good time to start talking to other people, because you know they're trying to figure out the situation. So just there you see opening and the kind of opening for conversation. You know, hey, you guys are thinking about this goal that is going to be achieved in 5 years. Let's start talking about how to solve it together. The second thing that I wanted to point out was in constraints, which I think is really interesting, and it's been mentioned before around energy. Now, the regulator, in order to solve that issue, you have to coordinate with other government bodies and other sectors of the economy. And it could very well be that is one of the big hurdles for them, because if you're thinking of government organizations, some of them have their own priorities. They're not interested in coordinating with others. They might not even, in some cases, it might be easier for a non-governmental stakeholder to facilitate communication between 2 government bodies, because there's so much prestige within the government bodies. So that could be a very big thing, even though they're part of the same stakeholder group, probably. they might be lacking the communication that you guys can facilitate. The third one was, I took a note, I have to see what. No, it was to facilitate circumstances. I took a note there. I can't remember why I took that note right now, but it was something I liked about that one. Yeah. You need to. Oh, yes, that was it. Yeah, that's what you guys were mentioning, that facilitating the circumstances of for example, an operator in order to create incentives for them to extend out in rural areas. I think that is something really interesting idea. And if you're thinking about it in terms of what they would need help with, is that is probably a constraint that is regulated by Parliament in terms of what benefits you can provide to foreign investments or investments in general. So I think that is a pretty cool idea, having that as kind of incentive that you would have your operating license being extended if you're acting in sort of a beneficial way. And it's a pretty cool idea, and I can see how that would be something that a regulator would find as an attractive idea, but that they would in turn feel that, oh, how am I going to convince my legislator to actually give me the mandate to do it? So thank you all very much for a great presentation. What we're going to do is we're going to have a quick break, 15 minutes, and then we're going to start the policy session on access. It's going to be a slightly lighter version because we're running out of time, but it will match quite well with what we've done this morning. So it's going to be essentially an extension of that with a little bit of kind of creative thinking at the beginning. All right. Thank you.